Okay, so we are going to start. So yeah, please take a seat. Okay, yeah. So welcome everyone. Yeah, it's great to see so many people here today. So maybe some of you have been to Consciousness Club before. Actually, we started Consciousness Club about 4 years ago. Actually, that was when we got a CREST grant to work on artificial consciousness. And yeah, so the main goal of this Consciousness Club is to build community of people interested in consciousness from many different backgrounds. So, I got interested in consciousness from neuroscientific viewpoint, but now we can study consciousness from AI, philosophy, mathematics, physics, and so I felt it was like really important to build in a community where people from different backgrounds can talk to each other. So, but then we didn't have this meeting almost for 2 years. But now, since we moved to this bigger office, so we have this space and also we have more people to support this kind of effort. So I'm very pleased that we have this meeting again, and then today we have Dr. Akaishi as the first speaker, and also can you sum up? Yeah. So Hamada-san joined us recently, and then he's doing all the work to make this happen. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming, everyone. Yeah.
Okay. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now can you introduce the speaker?
Yes. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I am Hiroaki Hamada. I'm a researcher in Alaya and also moderator of this Consciousness Club. I think everybody knows me because you saw the compass. My name is on it. And this is my great pleasure to have Dr. Rei Akaishi from Riken Center for Brain Science. And he started his career on perceptual decision making, as I think that's right, in University of Tokyo, but he actually went outside and come back to Japan, like back and forth. And after his PhD, he worked with Matthew Rushworth in Oxford University about credit assignment problem, combining with like machine learning and neuroimaging. Furthermore, he also spent time in Rochester University with Ben Hayden. And from this year, they got his PI position in Riken, CBS. So he has been working on higher cognitive decision making and its neural process. Today, Lei is going to talk about multiscale neural process of process underlying decision making. I think this will be a great example showing that complexity of the human neural process underlying decision making. And I think this will be the great start point to have a discussion and interaction between neuroscientists and the AI researchers. So we should now welcome Lei and listen to it.
Thank you so much for inviting me here, and it's a great honor to join this prestigious symposium. So I'm actually a decision scientist, and so I'm really interested in the difference between the human information processing and the machine information processing. And so this New Yorker cover page depicts some kind of the sentiments around the world that humans are getting kind of poorer and more stupid, and AI is getting more clever and so on. But I think this kind of the more conflictual view is not so accurate. I think we have to kind of compare and what's the unique nature of the human intelligence and machine intelligence. So together, I think we can progress about the studies of intelligence or something like that. And the issues of the consciousness is quite important for many people. And usually it's talked about in the discourse of more philosophical perspectives. But I think Kanai Sensei is really unique to think about the functions of the consciousness. And I think this kind of the focus is really meaningful. And I'd like to kind of talk about this kind of approach from the decision science perspective. So from the traditional styles of the decision study, decision making is like this. So choosing the apple or donuts. So how many of you would like to eat apple now? Could you raise a hand? Okay, about half. Okay. Who would like to eat the donuts? Okay, about half. Great. So we kind of think about the values of choosing each options, and it's fairly simple choice. And do we need any consciousness for it? Maybe you need, but maybe not so necessary. But I think the decision that actually requires some more sophisticated computation is like this. So in our real life, the decision is really complex, and actually the consequences of the decision is really uncertain. And you don't even know how many options you have, and you don't know when the outcomes of those decisions comes in the future. So that kind of the uncertainty and the complexity is reality, actually. So the very famous guy like Herbert Simon, sorry, I have misspelled here. So those shapes or styles of decision he was thinking is that when you are choosing about the very simple options, you can make fairly rational, reasonable decisions. But the kind of the scales and complexity and uncertainty increase, so that you really make some really stupid decision making sometimes. But this guy is really genius, and he said it's not just stupidity that happens. So he said we are doing some kind of the satisficing, which is words combining the suffice and the satisfactory. So he said decision makers can satisfy either by finding optimal solutions for simplified world or by finding satisfactory solution for a more realistic world. Neither approach, in general, dominates the other, and both have continued to coexist in the world of management science. So this is the speech given by him in the Nobel laureate lecture. So from this statement, he suggests at least two kinds of the information processing are going on when we are making decisions in the real world. So then I ask myself, the decision scientists, are we studying this kind of decision? And so most similar kind of the decision is like this. Actually, it's not based on the human decision, animal decision in the wild. So animals usually forage in the local environment, and usually kind of forage and roam around in the very small areas of the environment. But sometimes those animals think about larger environment as well, so that if the local environment getting worse, they can switch. So this animal have to think about both in the local scales and the more global scales as well. So, for example, he is kind of eating up the local resources like this, and at certain point, he starts thinking about the more global environment, what would be available in the other environments. So this animal is computing information both in the local scales and the more global scales as well. So this kind of the decision making is introduced to the neuroscience fairly recently, and around the time of the 2011 and 2012, both human and monkey researchers. And some more recent developments, the ones I'm involved myself. So, but you wonder what's related to some kind of machine learning, what's interesting for the machine learning people. So this is my just quite bold guess, but try to kind of relate to your background. So that when training the neural network or some kind of function, you kind of try to find some kind of the optimal point. And sometimes the point is quite local and then not kind of the global minimum. So this kind of the search process is also in some way related to the behavior of the animals as well. So that the animals are trying to find some best places in the environment where you can get the many food resources. So interesting characteristics of this movement is that, please look at the left side, and they just don't roam around in the local environment with the same small steps. But sometimes those animals jump to the distant places. And the interesting thing about this pattern is that when we search for the interesting information, so this is the gaze information, the patterns of movement of gaze follows this kind of the movement patterns as well. So the possible reason for this kind of movement is that the resources, for example, the food resources are clustered, not homogeneously distributed in the environment, but clustered at certain places in the environment. So that it's good to sometimes jump from one place to the another, so that you have better chance to get more resources, energy, and so forth. And it's maybe similar to the information search as well, so that if the information is clustered in the environment, not evenly distributed, sometimes you shift your focus, attention from one place to another. So the gaze pattern is somehow similar to this kind of the pattern of the movement. So there are two kinds of movement, two kinds of the behavior. One is fairly more local, and another one is more global. So some people say this is related to the exploration and the exploitation. And those different modes of the behavior or decision making have been studied in the very separate lines of the research in decision making. And the exploration, which is studied in the name of the foraging decisions. And for the exploitation, I'd like to claim here it's related to some kind of the inertia and the bias as well. So that if you get some good result, good reward in the local environment, you try to repeat the same movement, same behavior, same patterns of information processing. So these two kinds of the information processing is fairly prevalent in both humans and animals. So I'd like to talk about one example for each in these presentations. And interesting thing about those distinctions is that those different modes or manners of information processing seems to be subserved in the different brain regions. So one maybe in more dorsal medial brain regions and another one in more ventral prefrontal regions. Okay, so do you have a question so far? Any question? Okay, I assume you understand everything. Okay. Yeah.
You think if there is a non-continuous behavior pattern, it's like binary, but not.
Maybe not just binary, but the distribution of the size of movement steps distributes more broadly. And it's not a simple kind of Gaussian kind of distribution. But as you know, to realize that kind of distribution or Levy walk or Brownian motion, there could be many mathematical realizations. And I don't claim anything about the mathematical foundations, but in terms of the information processing in the brain. Okay. Yeah.
Since we're asking questions, are you claiming that, or are you implying that this weightedness of this distribution, you don't just go uniformly and random walk, but you have this weighted pattern? This is due to something informed, like an informed search,
Mm-hmm.
or is that like informed at every step, or that's selected on a higher level, and the whole pattern is selected for?
You mean some kind of regulation of two kinds of processing?
You could say that. So is there a feedback within, you're saying that there is a feedback within this search, or the pattern is just weighted with the distribution, and the distribution doesn't move anymore?
Yeah, so it's dependent on the past experiences, so that if the distribution is really uniform, you don't have to do this kind of the Levy walk-like movements, and the behavior, or at least the gaze patterns, change based on the distributions of the information here. So if the information is distributed in the diffuse way, in more homogeneous way, the gaze pattern gets more homogeneous as well. So, but the structure of the environment, structure of the distributions kind of influence your movement as well. And even for the Levy walk movement, there's effects of the memories, and usually Levy walk is memoryless process, but in the usual actual movement of animals, it's affected by the memories. Okay. Yeah, so I assume you understand that. Okay. So I would like to talk first about the decision inertia. So when we conduct usual experiment in psychology or neuroscience, we have kind of the discrete time units such as trials, and you present one option or two options at a time to the subjects. But actual time course or temporal units in the real environment is not restricted to the unit time or certain basic time units. The effective extent of the time is fairly variable, and it spans across multiple time scales. And the choice or information processing about environment is not just about the reward-related stimuli, but you process some kind of the sensory stimulus and the sensory state of the world. And usually those sensory states structure the world have continuity, so that the structure or state existed at certain time point will be continued in the later time points with some kind of the continuity. So those aspects of the structure or temporal structure of the stimuli in the environment may be reflected in the way we process the sensory information as well. So that's kind of the hypothesis. So as an experimenter, I started conduct experiment giving one stimulus in one trial, and then unrelated stimulus in the next trial. There's no relationship of stimuli from trial to trial. And we kind of assume that for each trial, subject, humans or animals, process those stimuli in a discrete manner. But if those information processing about these stimuli have longer time course, what will happen? So it goes beyond one trial, so that some kind of the information processing or traces of the memory overlap from one trial to another. And the decisions made for one stimuli would be carried over from one trial to another and influence the processing in the subsequent stimuli as well. And actually, that's quite prevalent and robust results found by many neuroscience psychologists in recent years. And that's quite a hot topic in the neuroscience and psychology field recently. And the papers like Nature and Cell and kind of Biology, eLife, Nature Neuroscience. So many papers have been published in this topic recently. So it kind of violates initial assumption that those information processing can be compartmentalized to individual trials. And the result overwhelmingly reject that assumption. And my study is one of the now oldest study which examine this kind of the phenomena. So in my study, I just did really simple experiment. And in each trial, subject presented one motion stimulus, random dot motions, and they just decided left or right, those overall dot motions are moving. And what I found is that even though those stimuli from one trial to another are unrelated to each other, the choices made in one trial is repeated to the next trials. And especially when the choices are made in the ambiguous situation, when those motion stimulus is very weak and there's not strong external information to make decisions. So the previous high in the left column is the very high motion stimulus, and the choice made in the high coherence motion stimulus, and the previous middle is the choice made in the middle level of the motion stimulus, and the previous low, which is the choice made in the really weak motion stimulus. And those y-axis show the probability of the repeating the choices made in the previous trial. So it's very simple. And do you have any question about this result? Anyone? Okay. So, as Kanai-san have done similar stuff very long time ago, and when we present this kind of data, many people ask maybe it's just a sensory after effects or some kind of motion priming, motion after effects. So we first try to exclude these kind of possibilities. And for the sensory after effects, we inserted very strong motion stimulus between trials. And this stimulus didn't require any response. It's just passive exposure. But if the choice repetition is the effect of the some kind of the motion stimulus processing per se, this kind of the stimulus should affect the choice repetition patterns. But it did not. Regardless of the direction of this inserted motion stimulus, whether it's consistent with the previous choice or opposite of the previous choice, very similar pattern of the choice repetition could be observed. So it's not sensory after effects. And for motor after effects, we changed the mapping rule from the decision itself to the motor response. So if it's motor repetitions, those choice repetition should occur only when those mapping rules stay the same. But regardless of these mapping rules, switch of mapping rules, we could observe those choice repetition patterns. So it's not motor effect, motor after effect. Then what it is? What is it? It's not sensory, and it's not motor. Then something in between. Something. So I kind of analyze the data in more longer time scales and in the whole data sets. And what we found is that those choices, effect of the choices kind of accumulate across multiple trials. So the x-axis shows the number of the choice repetitions in the previous sequence of trials. So the A is the type of choice, and the X is the last choice. And for the red data, the last trial follows the same choice repetitions. And the B, it is a reversal from those choice repetition patterns. So as long as the same choice repetition is continuing, the effect of the choice repetition kind of adds up, and people more and more made similar choices with higher probability. So there's something going on here, and I kind of made lots of models, tens or hundreds of the models to find some mechanisms and make some model comparisons. And what I found is really, really weird. And so in this task, there's no immediate feedback of the Akaishi correct or error. So some kind of the modifications or some updating rules shouldn't be based on the external feedback. So I used instead the choice itself as a factor to influence the internal state. And this, obviously, if the people make repeated choices, then the effect of the choices adds up and influence the ultimate choice in each trial. So this is really weird that we assume in the psychology, neuroscience, and even in some machine learning, choice output of the network itself usually don't influence the previous sequence of the information processing. But what this model tells is that the information processed internally and made some kind of choice, but this decision itself seems to be modifying some internal states, and the subsequent stimuli seems to be influenced by this some prior state or internal state. So it's really weird, and I was really skeptical. And is it really going on in the brain itself? And I kind of obtained some regressors to analyze the MRI data, and I correlated those regressors from the those equations, and I indeed found some neural activity in the crucial decision circuits that reflects this kind of the parameters. So those parameters, those mechanisms seem to have some neural correlates or foundation in the human brain itself, and maybe in the animal brains as well. And those equations also suggest that when making those updating based on the choices, some regions have to communicate the information to each other. So I made this very simple analysis of the correlation of these brain regions, and this is the data with seed regions, which is the activity derived from one part of the brain region, and then looked for the brain regions that correlated this original brain region, which is showing the CN-related activity, and I found the activity of this CN-related brain regions is actually correlated with the activity in CN-CN brain regions. So, but still I was skeptical. And I tried to find some other evidence showing this kind of the correlation between brain regions. And I used the TMS-EG techniques, which is the technique to examine the more causal interaction between brain regions. And I stimulated one brain region with very weak transcranial magnetic stimulus pulse, which is weak enough not to influence the ongoing brain processes. And then these stimulated brain regions send activated signals to the other brain regions in a manner dependent on the functional and anatomical states of the brains. And again, I found very similar media apparatus brain regions show some interaction with this those lateral prefrontal regions. And this spread of the activity is stronger when people are making repeated choices from previous trial to the next trial. And this result is actually similar to the fMRI results as well. And in this coupling of the fMRI board activity, the coupling is tighter, stronger when people making the repeated choices from previous trial to the next trial. So different methods obtained produced a fairly similar result of the interbrain correlation in this kind of the choice repetition phenomena. So what this neural mechanism is about? So these dorsal and the lateral brain regions are usually associated with the processing of the information presented externally. And those medial brain regions are associated with the information processing which is generated internally, such as memories. So those two brain networks very recently thought to be dissociable and uncorrelated in some kind of resting state brain connectivity analysis. But more recently, those two brain networks are kind of shown to be correlated in more dynamic manner in the resting brain, which is the brain of the subject supposedly doing nothing. So this result is very interesting that those two brain networks are actually showing some task-related activity. And especially it's interesting because those interactions of the internal information and the external information has to be integrated or has to be kind of interacting when people are making repeated choices, which is sometimes against the external information and that is the decision based on some kind of the internal information. So in the summary, those multiscale computation may be occurring in the perceptual decision making, and so it does not require computations though this task does not require computation at multiple scales. And the history dependency of perceptual decision beyond a single trial may reflect this multi-scale computation. And the sequential effect is not due to sensory nor motor after effects. And the model-based analysis show that decision itself creates the choice-dependent sequential effects. The choice-dependent sequential effects are subserved by the interaction between those externally oriented system and internally oriented system. So this is a very huge chunk of information. So do you have any questions so far? Yeah.
So you found this choice inertia or hysteresis effect. So do you think this can backward influence perception, or it's just locally in the decision-making process?
I think it's very interesting question, but it's a little bit difficult to answer. At least neurally, those history of the choices seems to be influencing the activity in the perceptual kind of really basic primary sensory areas. But it may be those activity may be related to the some decision or attention itself, and I don't know, it's the perceptual process per se or some kind of more higher order top-down effects. I don't know.
So it's possible there is kind of coupling in the perceptual and decision-making process. Because the decision process only influence the decision process in the doesn't influence the perception.
So there is long-term debates that the perception and the cognition can be dissociable or not, and sometimes those debates just made just about the definition of what's perception and what's cognition. My position is that quite large part of the perception is mostly fairly cognitive and decision related. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the instructions you give to participants when you did your experiments. Because in psychology, the instruction you give can actually give very different results based on what you tell them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you try with different instructions to see if you could find a way to cancel maybe this effect that you found, or if you didn't try that at all.
I just instructed subject to make decision on each trial, and I didn't tell anything about the correlation of stimuli between trials or not.
So you didn't try to actually, for example, unfold this, after you discover those results, to say you have to make a decision on each trial and try to make it as independent between each trial as possible. So try to reinforce this idea of try not to take your decision from the previous trials into account to see further to vary actually in your results.
I could do that, but interesting thing about this result is that people usually do not notice they are repeating the choices.
Yeah, because we have similar things when people try to figure out a grammar that is given to them, and that basically the decision is based on the past.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a similar effect that actually they're not, you can predict what they're going to choose afterward because of what they saw, because they figure out the grammar unconsciously. So I was wondering if it was a similar idea here. It's very much connected.
So there are many manifestations of the sequential effects, and some parts could be really under the control of the conscious access, but my guess is not all of those processes are under those conscious process. Yeah, that's my guess. Yeah.
So I have a question and a sub-question. And the question is, I guess it's linked. Were you surprised? How surprised were you by the results?
Mm-hmm.
And the sub-question would be, well, to me it's pretty amazing, right? That you have a linear model, but to some extent, right, without the feedback, and it predicts everything you want. So how linked is that to the task? Did you try to vary the task? Did you try to push the timescales maybe? Is that how did you choose that?
Okay, so I conducted the fMRI experiments as well, I have shown. And in that case, those choice repetition is same or even stronger, or actually mostly stronger. So it's not those traces of previous choice is not time decaying. So I don't know what the neural basis of this effect is.
So how robust, you talked about robustness in the first part, right? So how robust is this behavior? Did you try to push it until it breaks? So how do you make it break?
In terms of the time scales, those first psychophysics experiments are like 3 seconds for each trial. But for the fMRI experiment, it's something 10 seconds to the 18 seconds. So it's very different, but kind of based on the frequency of the events, it's similar. It's similar phenomenon.
So not surprised.
Yeah, it's surprising, but if it's kind of deliberate efforts to keep those information or choices made in the past as we think more rational way, we try to keep it, but even when those choice repetition is not good, we anyway keep it. So that's kind of surprising or interesting to me.
I have two
okay,
questions.
okay.
It's related to one of the questions asked earlier. So whether this is perceptual or bias in decision making.
Okay.
And actually, a long time ago, we tried a similar experiment with confidence rating, which we never published. But it seems like confidence is also biased by the prior trial. So if it's like purely decision making, then I think maybe the confidence should, well, this, like we can compute the criterion for confidence, and then that also shifted. So that means maybe the subject, the bias in this effect is something what our subject feels like genuine. Maybe that means more perceptual. I don't know if anyone is a similar experiment with confidence in public.
So the laboratory of Hak-1 Rao published some confidence carryover effect, but it's not in relation to the choice repetition per se. But the things occurring in the confidence experiments seems to be very similar to the choice itself. So those confidence and the choices may be based on the similar neural information processing, which also have some longer time constant than single trial. Yeah, so that's very interesting that confidence itself seems to be related to the information processing in the more larger scale as well.
Another question is, there's a phenomenon called stabilization in bistable perception. So, so then you see a bistable stimulus briefly, and then after 10 seconds, if you see the same stimulus, you keep seeing the same way. So is your phenomenon related to this effect, or it's different phenomenon?
I think the decision making here involves the response itself, and whether so the bistable phenomena do not involve any response in many cases, and in this case, in each trial, subjects are making responses, decision, and explicitly expressed as a motor response, even though motor process per se is not related. So to what extent those phenomena in the bistable perceptions and the choice vision is related to the kind of overlap of this kind of perceptual processes and those decision processes. And my guess is it's fairly overlapping, but not everything, I think. Yeah.
A quick question.
Yeah.
So why did you use a human as a subject of this study? Could that be okay for monkey or rodents? But it's
So-
so simple task.
As I have shown in the beginning, those studies range from the rodents to humans, even monkeys.
Okay.
So it's quite prevalent in the, at least in the mammalian species. Any other questions? Okay. 8 minutes I have.
Yeah, but how many slides do you have? Yeah, you can
Yeah, okay.
continue
Okay,
as
okay.
much as you can.
Okay. So foraging decision, and this is a very old book, which is published in 1980s, and actually the founder of the neuroeconomics read this book and started the neuroeconomics movement in neuroscience itself. So it's very historical book, and very simplified version of the theory here is an animal is attempting to maximize the rate of return of the energy of food, which is the average rate at which it acquires energy. So for the animals, what matters is not single rewarding outcomes, but how frequently, how robustly they can get how much amount of the energy at unit time. So as I have explained that those food resources are non-homogeneously distributed across the environment. But those characteristics of the distribution has to be taken into account for making decisions when to leave one food cluster, which is called patch. And those optimal time in patch is dependent on the distances of the food patches, so that if those food patches are further away, it takes lots of time and energy to move from one patch to the next. So you kind of try to stay longer in one patch. But if it's close together, you can leave the patch very quickly, so that you can kind of maximize the rate of the return in the food intake. So the initial idea to conduct this foraging kind of the experiment is that those temporal scales or information processing across multiple temporal scales would be related to this kind of the path-driven decision. And I worked with the Marco Wittmann, who was then the very talented graduate student in Marshall Rushworth's lab, and we together devised, created this kind of the experiment. And so in the very simplified depiction of this task, one patch, which is the current patch, the subject is foraging, start with the very good state, very rich state, and then gradually decline in the food resources. So this is the green curve. And for another patch, which starts fairly poor state, and then gradually increase its richness of the food. And the task or what subject have to do in this experiment is to decide at certain time point to stay in the current environment or leave the current environment. So this is something like a job search process, and whether you are satisfied with the current job, and whether another environment, another job gives you more pleasures or more opportunity or something like that. So the reference comparison in this task is the red patch, which is between the blue patch and the green patch. Blue patch is going better, and green patch is going worse. And those richness or the states of this default patch is learned by the subject by the practice session before the main experiment. So they know how that state of the patch, if they chose to leave the current patch. But interesting point in this task design is that those information just before the stay and leaving decision do not give you the sufficient information how the current environment goes in the future. So you have to really estimate the future state from the sequence of the experienced rewarding events. And the more detailed explanation of this task is that the subjects make one button press at each time. Then the outcome is either some amount of the reward, which is depicted by the yellow area. Sometimes there's no reward. In that case, the base is empty. And the reward rate is the total amount of the rewards obtained divided by the time. So this average rate of the reward either going better in the blue patch and going worse in the green patch. And subjects have to kind of calculate implicitly how the current state, how the history of the reward richness have been in the current environment. And at experimental imposed timing, they were asked whether to stay in the current environment or leave the current environment to the red colored patch. And it's not a simple calculation, and it's quite stochastic processes. And what is programmed is just this average rate of the reward. Okay. So as I have said, subject have to make decision to stay or switch from the current environment, and what they can use to make this kind of decision is, one is the more immediate history of the reward events, and the other one is more distant reward events. And using both types of the information, subject can predict or extrapolate the states of the current path in the future. So, how the real subject did in this task? And we calculated the weights of the rewarding events in the past. And for the decision of staying or leaving, so that usually you can think that rewarding events make you wish to stay, and those non-rewarding events make you wish to leave. And the weight of the rewarding events, for example, very simple reinforcement learning, usually decays into the past. But real subject's weight, subject assigned for those events, actually starts positive and then reverse to the negative side. So that the fairly immediately occurring rewarding events got positive weights, and those distant rewarding events actually have negative weights. So that those rewarding events which occurred in the distant past actually made you wish to leave the current environment. So because the environment is changing continuously and monotonically, that actually makes sense, because the meaning of the immediate events and the distant past events is different. And for more foraging theory like examination, those average reward rate in the whole sequence of those events got negative weights, and those really recent reward events got positive events. So it's kind of comparing the baseline rates, average rates of the environment to the more recent reward events. And that's kind of the calculation the subject seems to be doing. So this is very unique results, and nobody before this study has found this kind of reversal of the decision weights before. And depending on the time points or time scales, those rewarding events means different thing. Yeah.
Sorry, I think I missed something. So the reward system is a refilling reward. What's the system here compared to the top one? How do you get rewards? So
Okay. So you make button press at each time step, and you either get some reward or not.
And if I make the same, I stay.
And you stay in the same environment up until your switch decision. And you can stay in the same environment if you chose to stay.
Yeah.
And the same trend continues in the same environment. So that this blue lines go like this. And if you stay, you stay in this blue environment and experience the rewards based on this trajectory of the reward rates.
Okay, so with your subjects, you do the 3 cases.
Yeah.
Those are the same cases. I see.
Is it clear?
I think, yeah, I misunderstood before.
Okay.
And so can we come back to the next slide?
Okay.
Sorry, I'm a bit slow. But
Okay.
This left plot, then you explained that that it makes sense. Can you say that again? Like why does it make sense that it's negative, and that I know that it's
Okay.
this decreasing end default?
So there are 2 types of the reward trajectories. One is starting from rich state and flowing down. And the other one starting in the poor state and going up.
Yeah, good investment.
Yeah. So it's either going up, going down, monotonically, and continually. Very simple.
Yeah.
And the meaning of these distant events to the future states relationship relevance from this distant event to the future state, and this immediate past state to the future state is kind of opposite. Because
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
okay, yeah.
So, yeah. No, I meant the relation between the negative on the bottom plot, the A plot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for example, if the reward rates in the distant past is rich, actually that kind of suggests that future state would be poor. And you want to leave the current environment if future state is poor.
But it could also decrease from the same level, except if you have, if all the curves look exactly like that.
Yeah.
If they might start.
Okay.
There is no
So
curve that starts
actual
lower.
curves
Yeah, exactly.
like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not intuitive to me.
It's not intuitive.
Because you have an amount,
Okay.
it can still go down, right? It still can be a bad investment. So it seems like if I
Yeah,
if I
but
put it to the past,
most
I would-
of the case, if that starts low, it's kind of getting better most of the time.
Yeah. I see. Okay.
Okay.
That case works.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Sorry.
Hmm?
So it seems that these results contradict the previous ones that you presented.
Yeah.
You said before that there was a decision inertia.
Mhm.
People tended to repeat their decisions.
Mhm.
And what we see here is basically as soon as they can see that there is a tendency to lose value,
Mhm.
they automatically switch. There's
Mhm.
not even a delay,
Mhm.
which means there is no decision inertia in this task at all. I'm a bit surprised. What?
So, at least the subject are not making decision here.
To leave or to stay? This is the decision.
There is just one decision.
Oh, there is
stay-
only one.
Just one decision here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because, yeah, again, on the same graph we were discussing before, I thought they had a choice to leave or stay before. But no, there is only one decision.
One
they can
decision
make.
here.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But your question is really important. In which situation those decision inertia kind of thing occurs, and in which situation more foraging type decision occurs? That's really very important question. Yeah. Yeah.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
So did you have a condition where
Yeah.
you had a high UR very constant, even low UR is?
Mm-hmm.
If you only have these two conditions only, then
So-
like early trials can predict whether you are on the decreasing path or increasing path.
Yes, of course. These behavior patterns is dependent on this structure of the or sequence of the events. But interesting thing about here is that depending on the nature of relevance of the past events or past events at very specific time points, those effects on the decision is really different. So we usually think reward is making you to repeat the same thing, but here it's not like that. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, can you go one more time back?
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, but so the curves on the right side, the many curves,
Yeah. Yeah.
they are all the possible cases,
Yes. Kind of. Yes.
and the subjects, they know that these are the only possible cases, or that
Subject don't know.
They have memory.
Yeah, but usually those sequences did not repeat, and also it's controlling the trial events just at the average level. So the exact events occurring at each quota press and the rewards are different, even following with the same trajectory.
When you say they don't repeat, you mean that you pick only one of those curves at a time,
Yes.
and you go with that one. It's not a distribution of curves. You don't get, you figure on one picked from the distribution, it's only one.
Yeah, yeah.
and how, so one subject, how many of those curves do this? Or like how many tries?
It's like a 60.
60.
60.
So one subject gets 60 times one of those randomly chosen
Yeah, from one of
things,
the
and then
trajectory.
it
Yeah.
makes decision.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So let me confirm, so, in this experiment, you didn't see these services effect, so then in the last experiment, you don't have feedback, right? The motion process.
So I repeat that in this task, choice is just one, and
You get a feedback immediately,
yes, feedback immediately. Yeah.
and your last experiment showed the division, inertia.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't even
Could you say?
sorry, does the experiment show the subject correctly every time?
Kind of. It's so for this kind of the experiment, what they got as an outcome of the decision is those rewarding outcomes. And in this case, reward outcome comes as a sequence of the events, not just single event.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, your previous analysis.
In that experiment, there is no immediate feedback.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of critical.
Yes, yes. So the kind of the condition is some uncertainty of the outcome. And in that case, subject have to make guess what states they are in. And they kind of assume the just made decision is kind of accurate or something. And in that case, they try to repeat that kind of the decisions. And here, there's lots of the outcomes, and they kind of try to estimate what characteristic of those outcomes and what patterns of the change across time about these outcomes.
Just want to know if you try, because all the curve that you showed are basically either going down or going up. You try like a curve that goes down and then goes up again, and see if actually it changes based on your decision, because it will increase the term.
Yeah, it will of course change, but what matters here is that depending on the relevance of events at each time point, they kind of combine those information in clever ways, because those nature of relevance of those past events to the future change depending on when that event occurs.
I mean, that you have one curve that decreases a switch, and then basically the next one is increasing or decreasing again. They switch again. Could be happen that actually they make critical switch, because actually it's not a linear increase.
Yeah, but what they experience is total of those events. And if it starts in the lower level,
those curves are connected. They never know when they switch to another trial.
So, okay. So they make choice here. And after the choice, they perform the same total press and receiving outcome for several time points. Then this kind of the mini block or long trial ends. And then start again.
So they know it ended.
They know it ended.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you see an effect of practice?
What do you mean practice?
So you said 60 trials, right?
Yeah.
So did you see that after they trained a bit, like they would make the decision right after the values swap, or like they were more, let's say, conservative at the beginning and liberal at the end? Some strategy that changed over time?
It's interesting question, but we didn't test it. What they experience is just this default patch in the practice sessions, which stay the same. But in the main experiment, they experience more volatile dynamic experiment. But you are right that the initial state is more stable condition, but in the main experiment, it's more dynamic, so that the people's strategy may be changing from more stable information processing to more dynamic information processing. That I think that's possible. Okay. Do you have any other questions? I think you guys will understand now.
Question for later.
Okay, fine.
How much more is there?
No, it's almost done. And new activity, as I have said, those are entire single cortex showed exactly the same pattern of the decision weights like this. And in the summary, when animals make decisions, they do not just consider the current environment, they compute about reward value that could be obtained in the other environment. The animals calculate the opportunity cost in the current environment. In the other environment, those anterior cingulate cortex plays an important role in this type of decision making. And what I'd like to tell you is that there's quite multiple levels of the information processing, and that may be related to those multiple scales in the environment itself to process those kind of multi-level structure of the environment. We have to have those information processing architecture. And what's about consciousness or metacognition? And it's kind of the really ongoing issues. And we are proposing the symposium in the next Japanese Neuroscience Society, how those metacognition and some kind of the consciousness-related processing is related to the kind of the exploration, which especially involves some kind of the multiscale computations. And those are the guys who have been really very productive in examining these issues from the humans, rodents, and monkeys. So hopefully this is accepted and you can attend most advanced symposium in Japan in the next year. So thank you for your attention.
Any questions?
Okay.
Because slide with the different boxes with the path, one further.
One further.
Next one.
Okay.
No.
No. One more. No.
No. I mean one forward towards the end.
This.
One more.
One more.
One more forward until with this box. Yeah. So this. So ST is determined. So you pick two curves randomly from the one that
Two
goes
types of curves.
Two types of curves. One that goes up, one that goes down.
Yeah. Kind of.
From these two sets.
Yeah.
One from each set.
Actually it's chosen randomly from any one of them. Yes.
But, so always one from the top, one from the bottom, or sometimes also two from the top.
Just one. Just one.
When you switch,
Yeah, you need two sequences for the.
when you switch, when the person wants to change, you choose randomly among all of them, or in the opposite box. If you're increasing the healing, you're going to switch to decreasing, or any of them.
So at each single occasion, it's either from this or that. Yeah.
No, A is the opposite. No, every time you select, it can be any, right?
Yeah, any, yes.
It can be any. You select one.
Select one.
Then you
And then I
switch.
see, so I select one curve from either of the two, and then I see its reward development, and then when do you ask me whether I want to switch?
So this timing is in this range, and it's randomly selected. Timing is randomly selected.
Between 10 and 20.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So
Every
something.
day you work at Alaya, and then on any day you can quit and you get a random job, maybe McDonald's, and then you work at
But I
McDonald's.
don't know which one.
You don't know.
So I only get to say whether I want to switch. I don't know I don't know that I'm going from the top to the bottom, or I can say if I switch, it will always be one from the other set.
So we don't know that the subject are making categorical decision here. They are just combining the information of the reverse occurring at each time point across time, and then guess future will be slightly better than those default paths, or slightly worse than those default paths. I guess they are not making categorical decision going up or going down. Personally.
Okay, actually, I don't understand the default.
So it's not perfect categorical decisions of the sequence. It's just asking whether you'd like to stay or leave.
Yeah. And what is what? So okay, again.
Maybe your mind is categorical, but other people maybe more.
But again, you pick one of those curves, and then at some point I get asked, "Do you want to switch?"
Subject don't choose curves.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's say we play this game.
Yeah.
You pick the curve.
Yeah, I pick.
I don't know which one.
Yeah.
I observe it for a while, and then I get. Yeah. Then you ask me, "Do you want to switch or not?"
Yeah.
And then I say, let's say, if I stay, I will just get the reward from this card.
Yeah.
And I see it.
Yeah.
And if I switch, you pick randomly
Yeah.
another curve.
No. If you stay, you continue with the same curve.
Yeah. And
If you switch, you jump to this default path.
I jump to the default path.
Yeah.
Oh. McDonald's.
Maybe better than McDonald's. Yeah. Otoya. Okay, good. Great. Any other questions? Any other questions?
So in your title,
Yeah.
you have meta, but how do you relate these experiments to?
Okay. So I think the way we process the information from the environment, we just don't process the information from the local environment or information or events that occurred in the immediacy. But you have to compare those immediate information from the larger scales of the information, which is also given by the experiences itself. But you have to really compare those more immediate information to the more larger scale information as well. So that kind of the multiplicity or meta process is really important, and making decision, especially in the situation you have to do some kind of exploration, not just exploitation.
So meta means knowing the default opportunity cost.
I think to calculate opportunity cost in the distant environment, you really have to have some kind of bird view, which process more larger scales of the information. That's my guess.
But in this experiment, what kind of bird view could subjects have? I don't understand.
Okay.
Is that just random guess or
So
previous experience?
So there is information more general, more longer time course. And those reward events occur in the longer time scale. It's compared to the more recently occurred events, rewarding events. So that's, my guess, is the information processing at kind of different levels. And those things occur even in fairly simple animals, as well as some kind of contrast effects, and ethologists have been documenting that kind of the decision pattern or contextual modulation in many cases, and this is one of the, I think, example of such kind of process.
I wonder if you look at the duration of the past that influence the future. Is it like always around the same time, like the x in your equation there? Is it always roughly the same?
You mean the ratio, this type of
how much time the past influence, how much time step is taken into account by the participant to actually decide to switch or not? So in that case, is that st minus x? That would be the x, I guess. So is it like a static? Basically, they take
I think it depends on the volatility of the environment, how fast those environments are kind of changing. And in this fairly slow time course, it's like 6 time steps kind of mediation. But more than that, it gets to the outside this mediation. Yeah.
It's faster,
And it's not absolute time length, but kind of rate and the frequency of the events, which is compared to the relative volatility of the change at which time steps or which number of the events those situations are kind of changing. So it's not absolute time per se, but a kind of rates of the change which is expressed at the frequency of the events. Okay. Yeah.
It's more of a remark. So on the next slide, you show some fMRI data, or yeah. So it's a remark because I think here this is the particular area that gets I guess more or less activated whenever you make the change, when you swap.
So this is activity at the time of those daily decisions.
And the contrast is those who change compared to those who stay.
Yeah, so we kind of regress us from the reward amounts occurring at each time range against these variations. So this is the data obtained from the regressing each amount of the reward obtained at each time steps.
So it's not really based on their decisions. It's based on the.
It's not based on the decision per se.
Okay.
It's based on the experience reward in the past.
Reward system.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's very important question. So that the more decision-related processing occurs like this middle parts of the medial prefrontal cortex, or some more final decision is more to the further ventral side.
And I would have been interested, but I know you didn't test it, but whenever someone makes a change, sorry, in a way, because we were talking about consciousness, you could have asked after, were you confident in your in changing to swapping to another or staying, and then you could have contrasted also these activities based on whether they were confident or not. I think this would have even more insight into.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I think nobody has at least published. And I think Kentaro is doing something similar now. And but a usual confidence task in the animals have some kind of the longer time structure. So there's one initial decision, sometimes sensory, and then based on this condition of the first decision, animals guess the second decision would be rewarding or not based on the choice there. So it's not the decision at single time point, even for this very simple animal confidence tasks. There is some long range of the time scales involved in this confidence judgment in animals. So that's why those researchers are interested in this kind of the relations of the metacognition, confidence, and the exploration issues.
Seems like an interesting symposium.
Yeah, hopefully this is accepted. Yeah.
Question about, I guess it's remark about the experiments in game theory, like optimal foraging theory. In general, you have you rapidly. I don't know. I think the tradition, maybe I'm wrong, to go from local solutions and go to like infer like the higher time scale, like longer time scales. But if you look at AI in general, the experiments usually go immediately to mean field solutions, and then you try to zoom into like more detail, right? So I feel like both are probably right. Like here you are attempting one direction, right? Like go from local to infer the larger scope of things, but you could actually switch. Well, you want maybe to switch from the general solution to the other one. I don't know if you have thoughts on this in the case of human or animal decision making. Is there some kind of underlying mechanism that pushes you towards one or the other hypothesis?
I think animals, including humans, calculate those information at both levels simultaneously. And so this is how this is. So what's the benefit of this kind of the calculation is really interesting issues. It may save lots of the calculation and make some approximation of the good decision or good computations. But for the artificial systems, it kind of computes everything with the same details, right? Yeah. So the biological system try to save costs, and maybe that kind of the principles is related to this kind of the computation. That's my guess.
Yeah, that pushes you back to your biases you were talking about. The
Yeah.
Examples, right?
Yeah. So bias is itself kind of the makes you more biased. Every time you make the decision, you kind of simplify the processing further and further. And that means saving lots of the costs involved in the computations. And if the environment didn't change, why calculate everything all the time? You just make the simplification at each time you make a decision. Yeah.
If you know that you're working at McDonald's.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. But we already ran out of time, so let's thank Rei again. So, yeah, so we have to leave actually, but if somebody has like a signature from the staff from Araya, I will write it down. So please come to me, and I will write it down. And we will have this consciousness club kind of irregularly. Next time we're going to invite David Howe. So already posted on my Twitters and also PRX. So I will also update the YouTube channel. So please check that. Yeah, he won the closed seminar, so we don't broadcast David has a seminar, but please register it. And after that, we will invite some people. And actually, one of the participants will be the speaker next time. Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, so now the time we have to leave. Yeah. ありがとうございました。長い時間。
ありがとうございます。
ちょっと長め。